Erica Frankenberg, and I'm here to talk about my article, Exploring School Choice and Consequences of Student Racial Segregation Within Pennsylvania's Charter School Transfers. I authored this with Stephen Kotok, Kai Schaff, and Brian Mann. We know that charter schools are growing rapidly as a result of state and federal policy, and we also have growing racial diversity in our public school enrollment, yet at the same time we have growing segregation as well. At the same time, the Department of Education, the courts, and research affirmed the importance of racially diverse educational settings for students of all races. So our research set out to understand why we're seeing these patterns. We've seen from a growing body of research on charter school segregation that charter schools tend to be segregated, particularly for Black students. At the same time, studies of parents' preferences report that parents don't want their children to go to racially segregated schools, even if the decisions they make ultimately turn out to be segregative. Yet, we don't know whether parents are making these segregated decisions in the absence of more diverse offerings. So this research wanted to understand whether parents had more diverse charter school options and they were still choosing to make segregated options. So our research questions are, 1, does the racial segregation of Black, white, and Latino students differ between traditional public schools these students exit and the charter schools they enroll in, and if so, to what extent? And second, do students of different races choose charter schools where the racial composition is similar to theirs, and to what extent does a school's distance influence enrollment choices? We're looking in Pennsylvania because we have a range of both racially diverse settings in the suburbs, urban areas that have a high concentration of Black and Latino students, and white rural areas as well. Pennsylvania first authorized charter schools in 1997, and today they comprise about 6% of the total public school enrollment. Pennsylvania charter school law is also unique in that it provides for charter school transportation at the expense of public schools for all students who choose to attend charter schools within their district or up to 10 miles beyond their district boundaries. We used individual level student data provided by the State Department of Education to answer these questions, and we were looking at transfers that students made prior to the 2011-12 school year. We examined students in 10 metropolitan areas within Pennsylvania. All of them were majority white public school enrollment, but they ranged from approximately 54% white to 90% white in these metropolitan areas. And we used the exposure index as our measure of segregation, looking at the difference between students' exposure in the traditional public school they left and the charter school that they attended. I'll briefly talk about our findings and then move on to the implications of these. So first, finding number 1, we found that there was greater segregation for students who are making the transfer from traditional public schools to charter schools. It's important to note at the outset that Pennsylvania, like many states around the country, have very segregated traditional public schools. So this higher segregation is not because they are going to diverse traditional public schools. We found between the 2 school years that we were looking at, Black and Latino students in particular moved to charter schools in which their racial isolation was approximately 12 percentage points higher than the traditional public school they left. So an example of what that looks like. A Black student left a traditional public school in which Blacks comprised, on average, 68% of the entire student body, and they moved to a charter school that was, on average, 80% Black. There were similar patterns for Latinos, although Latino isolation wasn't quite as high. The patterns for white students were more mixed. Younger students moved to charter schools with a slightly lower white isolation, while high school students who are white moved to charter schools that, on average, were slightly higher in isolation. So then we get to our question to tease out why these patterns exist. So first, was segregation a result of fewer choices? What we found was fairly surprising that white, Black, and Latino students all had a range of choices. The majority of students had at least 10 charter schools choices within 10 miles of the public school that they were leaving. Within this, 80% of Black and Latino students had charter schools across the spectrum of racial composition. We divided charter schools into quintiles by the white percentage, so most Black and Latino students had charter schools options that were anywhere from 0 to 20% white, all the way to 80 to 100% white, for example. We also found that charter school enrollees of all races were traveling much farther than the average distance to their nearest charter school. Black and Latino students, for example, would sometimes travel twice the average distance from their nearest school, and whites would also go approximately a mile longer. This shows that students of all races have plenty of charter school choices, including across different racial composition, and that they're willing to travel beyond their closest school. The distance isn't the only option they're considering. So what are the implications of this research? I want to outline a couple of key things. First, there were fewer of the most diverse charter schools in our sample. So the fewest choices were those that were charter schools 40 to 60% white. That implies that we need to think about how we might establish schools with more diverse student enrollments and think about practices that charter schools can implement. Second, recent federal policy and state charter school laws prioritize racial diversity. To achieve these goals, we have a couple of recommendations. First, we need to educate the public about the benefits from all students from attending racially diverse schools, whether they're charter schools or traditional public schools. Policy should also expand outreach to all schooling options to all eligible children. And three, authorizers should consider charter school effectiveness at attracting a diverse group of students and granting or renewing charter schools. Finally, we need more work to understand the school decision-making process, why Black and Latino families, for example, are making the choices that we document here, and also to understand whether these patterns result from the choices that families are making or the charter school admissions process, or both.